It was the largest empire the world had ever seen. A true superpower stretching across 3 continents, from the shores of Greece to the mountains of India. For 2 centuries, the Achaemenid Persian Empire was the definition of power, wealth, and sophisticated rule. Its capital, Persepolis, was a jaw-dropping wonder of architecture and art. Its armies were vast, and its King of Kings was the most powerful man on earth. So how did it all come crashing down? How did a 20-year-old kid from the backwater kingdom of Macedonia bring this colossal empire to its knees in just a few short years? The history books usually give us a simple answer: Alexander the Great. A military genius who won 3 legendary battles. But that's not the whole story. It's not even the most important part. The real story, the untold strategy behind Persia's defeat, wasn't cooked up in a war tent. It was a story of internal rot, of hidden fractures and deep-seated problems that had been growing for decades. Alexander didn't just defeat Persia. He kicked a door that was already rotting on its hinges. This is the story of how the world's first superpower was doomed long before the first spear was thrown. The empire that ruled the world. To get why it fell, you first have to appreciate the sheer scale of Persia's might. This wasn't just another kingdom. It was a global system. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, hadn't just conquered lands. He pioneered a whole new way to run an empire. Unlike the brutal Assyrians before him, Cyrus practiced a revolutionary policy of cultural tolerance. Conquered peoples could keep their customs, their languages, and their gods. This wasn't just him being nice. It was brilliant statecraft that kept a massive, diverse realm from tearing itself apart. His successor, Darius the Great, was the architect of this globalized world. He was an administrative genius who knew that brute force wouldn't be enough. He divided the realm into provinces called satrapies, each run by a governor, or satrap, who handled local affairs. To connect it all, he built the Royal Road, a highway system that let messengers rocket from one end of the empire to the other in record time. He introduced standardized coinage, weights, and measures, creating a unified economic zone that fueled incredible prosperity. And then, there was the military. The image of the Persian war machine was one of endless numbers. At its core was the elite force of 10,000 professional soldiers known as the Immortals. Because their number was always topped off, if one fell, another immediately took his place. The empire could call on soldiers from every corner of its domain, creating a huge, diverse army of archers, cavalry, and infantry. From the outside, the Achaemenid Empire looked invincible. It had survived revolts, internal drama, and even a failed invasion of Greece. For 200 years, it was the unquestioned center of the world. The perception wasn't just one of power, but of permanence. But beneath this glittering surface, deep, structural cracks were starting to show. The gilded cage, cracks in the foundation. So where did the first cracks appear? Right at the very top, in its leadership. The King of Kings was an absolute monarch, a figure seen as having divine authority. But this absolute power created a gilded cage. Later Achaemenid kings became more and more isolated in their grand palaces at Susa and Persepolis, completely detached from the day-to-day realities of their vast empire. Power was concentrated in a tiny circle of court officials and eunuchs, and the royal court became a viper's nest of backstabbing and intrigue. Succession was a constant, bloody mess. Instead of a clear line to the throne, various sons of the king, born to different wives, would often fight over it. This led to brutal civil wars and assassinations. Brothers murdered brothers to grab the crown. Powerful courtiers, like the eunuch Bagoas, famously poisoned one king, installed a puppet, then poisoned him too when he got a little too independent, before finally helping Darius III, the man Alexander would face, to power. This constant political rot at the top sent shockwaves of instability through the empire, draining money and attention from much bigger threats. This weakness at the center gave power to the provinces. The satrap system, once a brilliant solution for governing, slowly became a source of fragmentation. Satraps, often thousands of miles from the king's eye, started acting less like governors and more like independent kings. They built up their own fortunes, raised their own armies, and chased their own ambitions. Throughout the 4th century BC, the empire was shaken by a series of expensive rebellions known as the Great Satraps' Revolt. Governors in modern-day Turkey teamed up with each other, and even with Persia's enemies like Sparta and Egypt to try and break away. While these revolts were eventually put down, they were a constant drain on the imperial treasury and military. The empire was being forced to fight itself, over and over again. On top of this political decay was a growing economic sickness. Maintaining the lavish court, funding a giant bureaucracy, and crushing endless rebellions was fantastically expensive. The solution? Heavy and unfair taxation. While the Persian heartland was taxed more lightly, the conquered territories had to shoulder most of the burden. Herodotus tells us that Darius I set up a fixed system of tribute paid in silver and gold, but over time, this system just got more and more oppressive. Worse, much of this incredible wealth wasn't being put back into the empire's economy. Instead, huge amounts of gold and silver were pulled out of circulation and hoarded in the royal treasuries at Susa and Persepolis. This policy, while making the king personally loaded, may have starved the wider economy of currency, possibly leading to stagnation. Key regions like Egypt and Babylonia, the breadbaskets and economic engines of the empire, were frequently in revolt, sick and tired of the heavy Persian yoke. The empire was becoming a top-heavy structure, sucking wealth upwards to support a glittering, isolated elite while the foundations crumbled. The mercenary trap. And maybe the biggest symptom of Persia's sickness was a fundamental change in its army. The military, once a symbol of the empire's strength, became a glaring sign of its core weakness. The Achaemenid rulers increasingly relied less on their own subjects and more on their wallets to fight their wars. Specifically, they hired foreigners to do it for them. They hired Greeks. By the 4th century BC, the Persian army was dangerously dependent on Greek mercenaries, known as hoplites. These were heavily armored infantrymen, disciplined and deadly in a close-quarters fight, exactly the kind of soldier the traditional Persian army lacked. The Persians were masters of light infantry, cavalry, and raining down a storm of arrows. Their own foot soldiers were usually lightly armored and not equipped for a grinding, face-to-face slugfest. So, they bought the best soldiers money could buy, creating the ultimate paradox. Persia was hiring its greatest rivals' warriors to defend its empire. This created a fatal weakness. Mercenaries fight for one thing: pay. Their loyalty only goes as far as the gold in their employer's bank account. They had no allegiance to the King of Kings, no patriotic reason to keep the Persian Empire alive. Their morale could shatter in an instant, and their loyalty was always for sale. The ultimate red flag for this mercenary trap came 70 years before Alexander, in an event called the March of the 10,000. In 401 BC, a Persian prince named Cyrus the Younger hired an army of 10,000 Greek hoplites to help him steal the throne from his own brother, Artaxerxes II. Deep in Mesopotamia, at the Battle of Cunaxa, the Greeks fought like demons, smashing through the opposition. But in a twist of fate, Cyrus himself was killed in the fight. Suddenly, the 10,000 were stranded, leaderless, more than 1,000 miles from home, deep inside enemy territory. The Persian commanders, thinking the Greeks were toast, tricked and executed their generals. But instead of surrendering, the mercenaries elected new leaders and did the unthinkable. They held together and fought their way north, through hostile armies and treacherous mountains, all the way to the Black Sea and, eventually, back home to Greece. The story, recorded by one of their leaders, Xenophon, in his book, Anabasis, became a blockbuster in the Greek world. It was a military thriller, but it was also a devastating intelligence report. It proved that a disciplined Greek army could march into the heart of the supposedly invincible Persian Empire and live to tell the tale. It showed that Persian control in its own lands was paper-thin. It was a lesson that one young reader, in the kingdom of Macedon, would never forget. This tangled web of political rot, economic strain, and military over-reliance was setting the stage for a spectacular collapse. The Persian Empire was a giant, but it was a sick one. All it needed was a little push. Before we meet the man who lit the fuse, if you're enjoying this look at the hidden side of history, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Your support lets us keep digging into these incredible stories. Now, let's meet the man who was about to give that push. A new kind of war, the Macedonian Storm. While Persia was slowly rotting from the inside, a revolution was brewing on its northwestern border, in the rugged kingdom of Macedon. For centuries, the sophisticated city-states of southern Greece had looked down on Macedon as a backwater, a land of rough-talking, hard-drinking shepherds. But in 359 BC, a man named Philip II took the throne, and he would change his kingdom, and the face of war, forever. Philip wasn't just a king, he was a visionary. As a young man, he'd been a hostage in the Greek city of Thebes, where he studied the most advanced military tactics of the time. He saw the strengths and weaknesses of the classic Greek phalanx, a block of soldiers with spears and shields. He went back to Macedon determined to build something better, something unstoppable. He started by turning a part-time militia of farmers into a fully professional, national army. His soldiers were drilled relentlessly, year-round, until they moved like a single organism. Then he gave them a terrifying new weapon, the sarissa. This was a monster of a pike, up to 18 feet long, twice the length of a normal Greek spear. When his Macedonian phalanx advanced, it was a bristling hedgehog of death, with the points of the first 5 ranks of spears sticking out ahead of the front line. But the phalanx was just one part of his masterpiece. Philip's true genius was creating a combined arms military machine. The phalanx was the anvil, a solid, unbreakable wall designed to pin the enemy in place. The hammer was his elite companion cavalry, made up of Macedonian nobles trained to be the decisive, battle-winning shock force. Backed up by light infantry, skirmishers, and engineers with advanced siege weapons, Philip's army was a perfectly integrated, flexible, and lethal system. In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip unleashed his new army on the combined forces of Athens and Thebes, the old powers of Greece. The result was a crushing Macedonian victory that effectively ended the age of the independent Greek city-state. Philip had united Greece under his thumb. His next stated goal was a grand crusade, a war of revenge against the Persian Empire for its invasion of Greece 150 years earlier. But before he could launch it, Philip II was assassinated. The throne passed to his 20-year-old son, a man who had led the winning cavalry charge at Chaeronea, a man who had been tutored by the philosopher Aristotle, and a man who now inherited the most advanced army on the planet, Alexander. He had the perfect weapon, and he had the genius and sheer nerve to use it. The storm was about to break. The anatomy of a conquest. In 334 BC, Alexander the Great crossed into Asia. His invasion wasn't just a military campaign, it was a clinical, brutal exploitation of every single one of Persia's hidden weaknesses. The fall of Persia is often told through 3 great battles, Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela. And looking at them now, you can see the real, untold strategy at play. The first battle, at the Granicus River, immediately put Persia's fractured command on full display. The local Persian satraps, instead of waiting for King Darius and the main imperial army, decided to deal with this upstart invader themselves. Against the advice of their most experienced mercenary commander, they chose a terrible defensive position with the river at their backs. Alexander, personally leading a charge across the river, shattered their lines and won a stunningly quick victory. He wasn't fighting the unified might of the empire. He was fighting arrogant, overconfident regional governors. The next year, at Issus, Alexander met the great king Darius III himself. Darius had brought a massive army, far outnumbering Alexander's. But Darius made a fatal mistake. He chose to fight on a narrow coastal plain, squeezed between the mountains and the sea. This geography completely cancelled out his numerical advantage. His massive cavalry wings had no room to swing around and flank the Macedonians. Here, Alexander revealed his core strategy. It wasn't just to defeat the Persian army, but to decapitate it. He knew the entire Persian command structure was a fragile pyramid resting on one man, the king. While his left flank held off the main Persian attack, Alexander took his elite companion cavalry and charged like a thunderbolt straight at the Persian center, aiming directly for Darius. It was a targeted, psychological strike. When the Macedonian phalanx also slammed into them, pure terror gripped Darius. He turned his chariot and fled. The second the king ran, his army dissolved. Victory was total. Darius left behind his camp, his treasure, and even his own family. The final, decisive showdown came in 331 BC at Gaugamela. This time, Darius had learned his lesson. He meticulously chose the battlefield, a vast, wide-open plain where his numbers, especially his cavalry and deadly scythed chariots, could finally be used to their full effect. He even had the ground leveled to make sure his chariots worked perfectly. Alexander responded with a tactical masterpiece. He advanced with his army angled to the right, a strange, oblique movement that lured the Persian cavalry on the left flank to stretch further and further out to try and surround him. As the Persian line stretched, a gap began to open near the center. That was the moment Alexander was waiting for. His infantry neutralized the chariots by simply opening their ranks and letting them pass harmlessly through. Then, Alexander wheeled his companion cavalry into a giant wedge. And once again, he charged not at the army, but at the gap that led directly to Darius. The charge slammed into Darius's personal guard. And for a second time, faced with the terrifying sight of Alexander's spear coming for him, Darius III panicked and fled the field. And for a second time, the sight of the fleeing king caused the most powerful army in the world to melt into a chaotic rout. Alexander's strategy was confirmed: cut off the head, and the body will die. The fall of the Persian Empire wasn't just the story of one man's genius. It was an autopsy of a superpower in decline. Alexander the Great was the catalyst, not the fundamental cause. He didn't just win battles. He exploited a series of deep, systemic failures that had been festering for generations. He exploited a fractured political system, where disloyal satraps ruled like petty kings and court intrigue had paralyzed the throne. He exploited an army that had become dangerously dependent on the very questionable loyalty of mercenaries, soldiers who fought for gold, not for an empire. And most decisively, he exploited a command structure so brittle and centralized that the entire imperial war machine was psychologically shackled to the personal courage of one man. 3 times Alexander aimed his spear at that single point of failure, and 3 times the empire collapsed. When Alexander marched into Babylon and Susa, and later burned the grand palace of Persepolis, he wasn't just conquering cities. He was signing the death certificate of an empire that was already dead on its feet. The real strategy behind Persia's defeat was, in the end, Persia's own. A long, slow, and unintentional strategy of internal decay and political stagnation that created a colossal giant with feet of clay. The story of the Achaemenid Empire is a timeless and sobering lesson. It shows how even the mightiest powers can become hollow shells, vulnerable to collapse from a sudden, unexpected shock. It's a warning that true strength isn't just measured in territory, wealth, or the size of an army, but in unity, leadership, and the will to adapt. The echoes of Persia's fall are a question posed to every superpower that has risen since. Are you checking for the cracks in your own foundation?